Imagine a quiet farm deep in the Bavarian countryside. Now picture 6 lives ended there, not by a thief who ran, but by someone who stayed on that farm after the murders. Someone who kept milking the cows and eating meals while the victims lay dead nearby. This is the Hinterkaifeck farm. Tonight we're going through the Hinterkaifeck murders step by step, and looking at why this farm, and the killer who stayed on it, still haunts true crime researchers a century later. Hinterkaifeck wasn't just a house, it was a small farmstead in rural Bavaria. A cluster of buildings sat alone between fields and dark forest. There were no close neighbors watching from their windows. No busy road, no steady stream of passing traffic. Just the wind, the animals, and the people who lived there. That isolation made the farm quiet and self-contained. It also made any crime there harder to spot. By the time outsiders noticed something was wrong, days had already passed. The farm belonged to the Gruber family. Andreas and Cecilia Gruber were the elderly parents. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, also lived there. Victoria had 2 children, young Cecilia and baby Joseph. A new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm on 31st March 1922. She was hoping for steady work and a simple rural life. She would live there for only a single day. Hinterkaifeck was not a calm, happy home. Andreas Gruber was known for being strict, harsh, and controlling. There were rumors of serious abuse inside the family. Some locals believed Andreas had an improper relationship with Victoria. There were also feuds with neighbors and arguments over money and land. Even before the murders, the farm carried a heavy, dark reputation. It was a place of secrets, shame, and buried anger. In the weeks before the killings, strange things began to happen. Nothing dramatic at first, but enough to scare the family. One day, Andreas noticed fresh footprints in the snow. They led from the edge of the forest, straight toward the farmhouse. There were no footprints leading back into the trees. It looked like someone had come out of the woods and simply stayed. Inside the home, the family heard footsteps in the attic at night. They went up to check, but found nobody there. Only dust, wooden beams, and silence above their heads. A house key suddenly went missing from its usual place. A newspaper appeared inside the house that nobody remembered buying. All of it felt like signs of an unseen presence watching them. The previous maid had already quit before all this. She said the farm felt haunted and that she was too frightened to remain. Her fear came from many small moments, not just one incident. Footsteps, noises, and the strong sense that someone else was there. Then came Maria, the new maid. She arrived at Hinterkaifeck on March 31st, with her suitcase and hope for a fresh start. She settled into her small room for her first night on the farm. By the following day, she was dead with the rest of the family. That weekend, the Grubers did not appear at Sunday church. On Monday, the children did not arrive at school. For a family with such fixed routines, this was very unusual. Neighbors began to sense that something was badly wrong. After a couple of days, concern grew into real alarm. A small group of villagers decided to walk out to Hinterkaifeck. They followed the farm track through the fields toward the isolated buildings. When they reached the farm, it did not look like a crime scene. The structures were standing, doors and shutters were mostly in place. The animals were alive in their stalls and pens. Some locals later said they had seen smoke from the chimney in recent days. From a distance, it looked as if someone was still living there normally. But the deeper they walked into the yard, the more wrong it felt. The searchers went into the barn to look around. Inside, they noticed a strange pile of hay and wooden boards in one corner. It didn't look random. It looked like something had been carefully covered. They began to move the boards and pull the hay aside. Underneath, they saw a human body, then another body, and another. 4 members of the family were hidden under that pile in the barn. Andreas, Cecilia the elder, Victoria, and young Cecilia had all been killed. The villagers then searched the farmhouse itself. In a small bedroom, they found the new maid, Maria, dead in her bed. In another room, baby Joseph was found lifeless in his cot. 6 people in total had been murdered on that isolated farm. There were no obvious signs of forced entry on doors or windows. Nothing clearly pointed to a stranger smashing their way inside. Investigators soon realized something even more disturbing. The killer, or killers, had not left the farm straight after the murders. They had stayed on the property for several days. The cows had been milked on their usual schedule. The animals had been fed and cared for in a routine way. Inside the house, someone had cooked food and eaten meals. Dishes were dirty in the kitchen. Some beds looked as if they had been slept in. Fires had been lit in the stove to keep the house warm. The farm did not look abandoned in panic. It looked like someone had calmly moved in after killing the family. This is what makes Hinterkaifeck so unsettling. Someone killed 6 people, then stayed and lived among their bodies. They walked past the barn, knowing 4 victims were buried beneath hay and boards. They moved through the rooms where a maid and a baby lay dead. And they calmly did the farm chores as if it was their own home. It suggests a killer who was cold, controlled, and very sure of themselves. The investigation that followed was badly limited by the time period. Crime scene control in the 1920s was poor. Villagers and officials walked through the barn and house freely. Important traces were likely smudged, moved, or destroyed. The likely murder weapon was a heavy farm tool, like a mattock. It was not found during the first search. Years later, a suitable tool was discovered hidden on the property. By then, it was far too late to test it properly. Many chances for hard physical evidence were lost forever. More than 100 suspects were questioned over time, but no one was ever convicted for the Hinterkaifeck murders. Forensic science in the early 1920s was very basic. There were no DNA tests and fingerprint work was limited. Toxicology and trace analysis were only in their early stages. Even with a perfect crime scene, it would have been hard to prove anything. This was not a simple robbery. Money and valuables were still found inside the house. Jewelry and cash were not taken. If the killer came for profit, they left a lot behind. That points toward a personal motive, not just quick theft. Revenge, hatred, jealousy, or a deep grudge all become more likely. The problem is, we still do not know exactly which motive fits. One major theory is that the killer was close to the family circle. Maybe a relative with a bitter dispute over money or inheritance. Maybe a man believed by some to be baby Joseph's real father. Someone who felt betrayed, shamed, or pushed aside. This person would have known the layout of the farm very well. They would know where people slept and how to lure them into the barn. They would feel confident enough to stay after the murders without being seen. In this theory, the crime is deeply personal and rooted in long-term conflict. Another strong theory points to a neighbor or local farm worker. Someone who lived nearby and knew the routines at Hinterkaifeck. They would know when the family was likely to be alone and unprotected. They might have held a grudge over money, land, or old insults. In a small rural community, such tensions can last for years. They would also know how to move around the property without being noticed. In this version, the killer was close enough to pass by often, but never truly seen. A third theory connects the footprints, the attic noises, and the missing key. Maybe a stranger had secretly moved onto the property. They could have been sleeping in the attic or the barn, watching the family. They might have slipped in at night, taking food and studying the routines. When something changed, or when they were discovered, they killed everyone. Then they stayed a few days more, living on the farm before vanishing again. In this theory, the killer comes from outside but learns to move like an insider. Some people suggest the work of a traveling serial killer. Others imagine a group of people acting together, not just one attacker. These ideas could explain controlling 6 victims at different moments. But without physical evidence, they remain speculation more than solid theory. Even a century later, Hinterkaifeck still attracts researchers and writers. Modern investigators go back through the surviving police files and photos. They recheck witness statements, timelines, and the likely movements of suspects. Some have named specific individuals they believe are the most likely killers. Often these suspects had clear ties to the family and believable motives, but suspicion on paper is not the same as proof in court. Without new physical evidence, no theory can be confirmed officially. So why does this story still bother people today? It's the combination of isolation, strange warnings, brutal murders, and the killer calmly staying afterward. The setting feels like something from a horror film, but it was real. The warning signs, footprints, noises, a terrified maid feel like a slow-motion alarm. And the fact that the killer lived on the farm after the murders adds pure psychological horror. In your mind, what makes the most sense? Do you think it was someone from inside the family circle? A neighbor or local worker with a long, bitter grudge? Or a hidden stranger who slipped onto the property and then disappeared forever? Let me know your theory about the Hinterkaifeck murders in the comments. Tell me which detail you think matters most. The footprints, the attic noises, or the killer staying on the farm. If you like deep dive breakdowns of real unsolved cases, you can subscribe to Midnight Evidence for more. You'll find links to my other platforms in the description if you want the short versions and future cases. Your support helps me keep spending time researching these stories. Thanks for watching.